I'm happy that we're joining we're all meeting up here for the third session of Matthew Carey's The New Olive Branch. This is something which Sam has read and pitched. Basically, we were originally going to read Thomas Paine's Common Sense originally, and because the theme of the American system of political economy has come up so much in our lectures for the Rising Tide Foundation, and in the past we had read Alexander Hamilton's works, we read some of Benjamin Franklin, we read some of Henry C. Carey's works. It seemed very lawful and it seemed to make a lot of sense to accept Sam's proposition to read Matthew Carey, the father of Henry C. Carey, who wrote a very important document called the New Olive Branch in 1820, at a moment of where America began, the United States having just come out of the war with Great Britain, had certain existential choices, and unfortunately, at the time, the nationalists, the patriots, who understood the nature of the epistemological battle that 1776 was an expression of, as far as a fight that was occurring over on the stage of universal history over the emancipation of the species. Those few, what you might call really the philosopher kings, the people who had that deep awareness of what was going on, were recognizing that some very bad decisions were being made, and a certain delusion was starting to set in. False mythologies were beginning to set in about America's British origins, that to be truly American, it was perceived that we had to be embracers of Adam Smith's British doctrines of free trade and Thomas Malthus, and maybe even the idea of imperialism was maybe seen as in accord with the traditions of what the United States was supposed to represent. Now, Matthew Carey, being somebody who was recruited at a young age as a revolutionary from Ireland by Benjamin Franklin, was somebody who was of a very high quality of mind, and he recognized that this is sick, it's toxic. If this is not nipped in the bud, it will destroy America from within. And so the Olive Branch is just a wonderful assessment of how the United States was able to survive its precarious early decades after the Revolution, and at what points were the right decisions made. And in previous readings, we read a little bit about his summary of Alexander Hamilton's insights into political economy that allowed America to overcome impossible challenges, as well as the missteps, the embrace of the slave, the idea of labor being something that is tied to slave work, the idea that value is something tied to worshiping monetary theories instead of producing real wealth in the real world. So yeah, we're now into the third reading. I think it's the third. Sam, is there anything that you think that people should have in mind before we start this reading?
I mean, I'm a huge proponent of the American system of economics, so I can talk about it endlessly, which I probably shouldn't do. But yeah, this book and Matthew Carey himself were instrumental during this time in American history of um, rediscovering the Hamiltonian roots of America's success. And I think one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of the American system, um, and it's not just American; it's really like a universal, that it can be applied to any nation. And Friedrich List, who was influenced by Hamilton, called it the national system, because it helps to build up strong nation states. Um, but to a person, without an exception, um, every proponent of this system, from Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin, to Matthew Carey, John Quincy Adams, Abraham Lincoln, William McKinley later on, they were all anti-slavery and pro-progress, pro-industrial development, and it's not an accident that that to believe in the American system is to believe in the worth of technological progress and free labor. And I find the examples of these characters in history very inspiring. And so I like to go back and read the original writings. Henry Carey's Harmony of Interests is one phenomenal example, as well. Henry Carey's On Money, which Matt did a reading session on, which is much shorter, but it's a fantastic read on the philosophy of the nature of money itself, and what is its purpose, and from what does it derive its value. And Matthew Carey, being his father, had a huge influence on him. And so, I'm really happy that we're reading this tonight. And Matt, I'll just say, I think we're on chapter 8, but I think we can skip chapter 8. It's really just a summary of the Congress delaying in terms of action. And I think we can do, I'm hoping that we can do chapters 9, 10, 11, and 9, 9, 10, 11, and 12 today, because uh, especially 9, 10, 11, they're quite short as chapters.
Okay, let's aim for it. So in that case, got chapter 9. We just need a volunteer reader. Who would like to read for today?
I'm always available.
Hey, Bruce, the golden voice. Yes. Radio
Glad you
All
spoke
right.
up,
All right.
Bruce. Yeah, I read all of last week, so I figure I need a rest.
No, I hope not, Paul. I hope you will read too, because it's always
Okay,
nice.
yeah.
But
If
Bruce,
needed,
yeah,
if
Bruce
needed,
is
yeah.
the dulcet tones of Bruce. Let's go.
All right. I've got my air conditioning on in the background. Is it distracting? Can you hear it?
No.
Not at all.
Good. Chapter
Not a
9.
button.
What? All right. Attempts to prove the state of affairs prosperous. Their fallacy established. Destruction of industry in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Awful situation of Pennsylvania. 14,537 suits for debt and 10,326 judgments confessed in the year 1819. Depreciation of real estate. Wow. $115,544,629 for a considerable time. Elaborate efforts were made to prove that the great mass of our citizens were highly prosperous. Even official messages at no very distant day announced this idea, but the veil that obscured the appalling vision of public distress is removed, and there is now no diversity of sentiment on the subject. Bankruptcy of banks, individual ruin, and sheriff's sales to an extent never known before, the idleness of thousands of those who have no property but in the labor of their hands, resolutions of town meetings, memorials and petitions from almost every part of the middle and eastern states, messages of governors, deliberate instructions of the representative bodies in some of the states, acts of legislatures suspending the collection of debts, and, to close the long train of calamity, the emigration of American citizens to a Spanish colony, seeking an asylum from the misery they suffer in their own country, all distinctly proclaim a deplorable state of society, which fully evinces a radical unsoundness in our policy, loudly and imperiously demanding as radical a remedy. No temporizing expedients will suffice. Nothing short of a complete and permanent protection of the national industry, so as to enable us to reduce our demands from Europe within our means of payment, will arrest us in the career of impoverishment and enable us to regain the ground we have unhappily lost, and take that high and commanding stand among nations which nature and nature's God, by the transcendent advantages bestowed on us, intended we should enjoy, advantages which for 5 years we have so prodigally squandered.
Right. Oh, first one. Sorry.
Although the prevailing depression and distress are generally well known, yet few are fully acquainted with their extreme intensity. Indeed, it is at all times difficult and scarcely possible to realize, from general description, the extent of suffering which mankind endure, whether by war, famine, pestilence, or want of employment. In the last case, it would be necessary to traverse by lanes and alleys, to ascend to garrets or descend to cellars, to behold the afflicted father, after having pawned his clothes and furniture, destitute of money and credit, to support his famishing wife and children, his proud spirit struggling between the heartrending alternatives of allowing them to suffer under hunger and thirst, or else sinking to apply to the overseers of the poor to ask alms in the street, or to have recourse to soup houses for relief. These are afflicting realities with which I hope, for the honor of human nature, the presidents and delegates of agricultural societies who enter the list to prevent the relief of their fellow citizens and perpetuate their sufferings are wholly unacquainted. I cannot here enter into particulars of the awful scenes that overspread the face of the land, and shall confine myself to a slight sketch of the lamentable devastation of national prosperity and private happiness experienced in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, which so many worthy but mistaken men are laboring to perpetuate. By an investigation ordered during last autumn by a town meeting of the citizens of Philadelphia and conducted by gentlemen of respectability, it appears so great was the decay of manufacturing industry that in only 30 out of 56 branches of business, there were actually 7,728 persons less employed in 1819 than in 1816, whose wages amounted to $2,366,935. No returns were procured from 26 branches, viz., bookbinders, brewers, brickmakers, carpenters, coopers, chocolate makers, calico printers, curriers, chair makers, dyers, engravers, embroiderers, glovers, glass manufacturers, manufacturers of gunpowder, painters and glaziers, plumbers, shoemakers, shot makers, sugar bakers, snuff and tobacco manufacturers, stone cutters, turners, tanners, umbrella makers, and wheelwrights, etc., etc.
Well done.
I'm exhausted. Assuming only half the number in these 26 that were in the other 30, where aggregate would be 11,592, and where only one woman or child dependent on each person, the whole, out of a population of about 120,000, lost in a single city in 1 year. I'd have to reread that whole thing to make it sound like it made sense, but I hope it conveyed that, right? Are we good to go? Or should I redo that whole sentence? I don't know.
We're good
Sam,
to go, mate.
Sam, what do you? Yeah, I think everyone was giving thumbs up. So
Do it again? Okay. Or
no,
we're all
no.
good to
You don't
go.
have to do it again. No.
Okay.
Oh no. Or I think that yeah, just keep rolling. Keep rolling.
Yeah, keep
All
going.
righty then. And the math equation there we'll skip to.
Yep.
Let us now survey Pittsburgh, where we shall behold a similar scene of devastation. This city, in 1815, contained about 6,000 inhabitants. It then exhibited as exhilarating a scene of industry, prosperity, and happiness as any place in the world. Its immense local advantages, seated at the confluence of two noble rivers, forming the majestic Ohio, its boundless supplies of coal, and the very laudable enterprise of its inhabitants had for a long time rendered it the emporium of the Western world. But alas, the immoderate influx of foreign manufacturers poured in there shortly after the peace produced a most calamitous reverse. The operations of the hammer, the hatchet, the shuttle, the spindle, the loom ceased in a great degree. Noble establishments which reflected honor on the nation were closed. the proprietors ruined, the workmen discharged. A blight and a blast overspread the face of the city, and the circumjacent country, which had shared in its prosperity, now equally partook of its decline. By a recent and minute investigation conducted by citizens of high standing, the following appear to be
the actual state of the city of Pittsburgh.
Thank you. Persons deprived of employment or less employed in 1819 and 1816, 1,288. Supposing only one woman or child depending on each of the above, 1,288. It would amount to 2,576. The amount of work done in 1816 was 2.6 million. In 1819, only 832,000. Lost to Pittsburgh, 1.7 million. Lost to Philadelphia, as before, 7.1 million. Annual loss in two cities in one state, $8.8 million. When the other cities and towns throughout the Union where similar devastation has occurred or taken into view, it will not be an unreasonable calculation to presume it sixfold elsewhere. But to avoid cavil, I will only suppose it treble, which will amount to 26.6 million, plus Philadelphia and Pittsburgh at 8.8 million, total loss of industry, $35.5 million. By the wretched policy of fostering foreign manufacturers and manufacturers and foreign governments, buying cheap bargains abroad, and consigning our own citizens to bankruptcy and beggary. With these overwhelming facts staring us in the face, is it not insanity to be debating about the causes of the existing distress? Who can entertain a doubt as to the grand and primary cause? Is it not as plain as the handwriting on the wall? Does it not clearly arise from the destruction of national industry? What, an annual loss in two cities containing about 125,000 inhabitants of nearly $9 million and proportional losses almost everywhere else. Such a course, steadily continued, would impoverish China more rapidly than she has accumulated her immense treasures. It is not, therefore, wonderful that it has, in a few years, impoverished a nation whose sole patrimony was her industry. Some public documents have recently appeared which prove the distress of the country far more intense and extensive than had been previously conceived. A committee of the Senate of Pennsylvania, appointed to inquire into the extent and causes of the general distress, addressed circulars to all the prothonotarians and sheriffs in the state, whence they collected the following awful facts.
Just quick, extra points for anybody who can teach me this word, prothonotarians.
I think the H in the middle there needs. Is it proto-notaries?
It's a legacy of the Middle Ages. So
Yeah.
just remove proto, and notary is a kind of lawyers, if you want.
Yeah, it goes to the notary for sure. So protho-notary.
Yeah.
Right on. Thank you, guys.
A prothonotary is a chief clerk of any various courts of law.
And the sheriffs, from whom they collected the following awful facts. The number of actions brought for debt in the year 1819 were 14,500. The number of judgments confessed, 10,300. Exclusive of those before justices of the peace, about half the number. Imprisonments for debt in the city and county of Philadelphia, 1,800. In Lancaster County, 221. In Allegheny County, 286. A report made to the House of Representatives by a committee appointed for the same purpose as that in the Senate appears to estimate the depreciation of the real estate in Pennsylvania at 1/3 of the value ascertained by the United States assessment in 1815, which was $316,683,000 or $33,889. Of course, the depreciation is $115.5 million. A memorial referred to in another report states that embarrassment is universal, that the sordid and avaricious are acquiring the sacrificed property of the liberal and industrious, that so much property is exposed to sale under execution that buyers cannot be had to pay more for it than the fees of office. Would to God that this affecting picture could be placed in large characters in Congress Hall, in the President's house, and in the offices of the Secretaries of State and the Treasury, that they might be led to take the necessary measures as early as possible to relieve such sufferings. This, let it be observed, is far from the whole of the evil. The comparison is only a retrospective one, to show the precipitous descent we have made from a towering height. Let us now see the point to which we might, and by a proper policy would, have arrived. In 5 years, from 1810 to 1815, as already stated, the manufacture of cotton increased from 10,000 to 90,000 bales, or 270 million pounds. The other manufactures of the country increased very considerably, but not in the same proportion. By the statements of the marshals and the calculations of Mr. Cox, a gentleman perfectly competent to this service, it appears that the manufactures of the United States in 1810 amounted to $172 million. Let us suppose that in place of a multiplication ninefold, such as took place in the cotton branch between 1810 and 1815, the increase was only double. It follows that in 1815, the whole of our manufactures must have amounted to nearly $350 million. Inferring from past experience, they would, under an efficient protection by the government, have increased from 1815 to 1820, 50%, and of course would be now above $500 million. It is impossible to pursue this train of reflection and compare what we might be with what we are without sensations of the keenest distress and a clear conviction of the radical unsoundness of a policy which has in a few years produced so much destruction of happiness and prosperity. Take that, so there.
Cool.
I don't know if anybody sees a parallel to today with NAFTA and the sending of our own industries overseas, and all of the foreign manufactured goods coming in to our dollar stores, and we're told, you know, what a good thing it is that that we can buy such cheap manufactured goods.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
A question that I have is that, of course, I recognize what you're suggesting. Being a manufacturer ourselves, that we've seen that decline from the cheap imported goods from all over the world, but in particular right now, China. Having not attended the first two sessions and not quite up to speed on this period of history, what was the control that changed, that caused that change in industry in America from 1815 to 1819, or in that period? You know, when we look at it today, it's we can see how there's been what would you call an armored onslaught of cheap goods coming in from overseas, where their sole purpose is to destroy the market and the productivity of the manufacturers in, air quotes, the first world. So back then, what was the cause? I'm not familiar with that period in history. Does anybody know more about that?
Yeah, so he talks about it in the earlier chapters, that the Hamiltonian system was destroyed at the hands of the Jeffersonians, and then the War of 1812 broke out, and they had no manufacturers, and so they rapidly had to industrialize to meet the needs of the war, and then at the end of the war, there was a general sense that, well, now we don't need all of these measures anymore, and so that's why he's saying up until 1815, 1816 was when the turning happened. And what he's arguing for is as we know, what will come later with the administration of John Quincy Adams, in particular, with Henry Clay in the House, and John C. Calhoun in the Senate, supporting the revival of the American system until it's destroyed again by Andrew Jackson, who vetoes the charter of the Second Bank of the United States, and then the American system. Henry Clay managed to somewhat keep it alive via federal land sales and revenues raised by that, but there's a large decline in the principles of the American system up until Lincoln and the Republicans, who Lincoln was very explicit that he was a follower of Henry Clay and the American system of high protective tariffs, internal improvements, and a national bank. Very explicitly said that throughout his whole life. And during the Civil War, the South wasn't in Congress, so the Republicans had an opportunity to implement a number of the policies. And then, because Lincoln was assassinated, his memory was kept alive through these policies, and period of time for the American system in American history was the Lincoln Republicans up until the assassination of William McKinley. Although even then there was a huge fight. The British had a large free trade network that they built up in the 1800s that went to work following the assassination of Lincoln, which we know was done by British networks. So I'm kind of rambling here, but yeah, that's
Sam, quick
history.
question right into that era after Lincoln and the British networks, and then we'll get right back to the reading.
Mm-hmm.
Off from the hip, top of your head, do you recall Americans who were members of the secret society Skull and Bones helping facilitate that?
No, from what I understand, didn't Skull and Bones come after that?
That was
Well, it formed in 1832. It formed in 1832,
1832.
and it's such a rich era, this post-Lincoln thing. But I'll defer back to our host as to whether we should get back to the reading or explore that a little more.
I just want to say something. It won't take 5 seconds, okay? What happened in 1810, it's different because the US was a newborn nation. And what is happening during the last 50 years is the will of the global plutocracy, and many of them in the US, to empty the industrial basis of the US for a global plutocracy based on financialized economy. So I'm not rejecting that there are many big principles at the basis in the two situations, but they are not exactly comparable in my understanding.
Yeah, no, there's just parallels. I mean, the promotion of free trade and the promotion of imperialism, and financialization, these rentier parasitical financier class, they seem to go hand in hand throughout history.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I want to say that is, once again, that politics is above economy. Okay, what is happening in the US, of course, is not the fault of the US citizens, but it has been decided by many American plutocrats for their own class reasons. I'm not defending them, but the source is within the Anglo-American oligarchy, which the American component is an important part. And that's only the stuff I want to say.
Yeah, it's the great weakness of the American system, that if the will of the people can be, manipulated, they can vote for their own destruction. And who was it, Matt? It was I'm paraphrasing there. It wasn't Edgar Allan Poe, was it? Is it
Cooper.
Edgar Allan Poe? Cooper, yeah, that's right. James Fenimore Cooper, yeah. But that's the great weakness of the American system. And that's what we see. So in a way, it is the American people's fault that they're derelict in their duty as sovereign citizens in a sovereign republic. But yeah, they're being manipulated. Public opinion is largely manipulated, and we can go to Edward Bernays and the rise of mass media and public relations, propaganda. But that's maybe for the end of the talk we can go there a bit more.
Yes, is that a characteristic of all democracies?
That's right, yeah.
Shall we proceed?
Yeah, keep her going, Bruce.
All right, chapter 10. Causes assigned for the existing distress, extravagant banking, transition to a state of peace, fallacy of these reasons, true cause, destruction of industry, comparison of exports for 6 years. Since public attention has been drawn to explore the causes of the existing evils, some of our citizens have ascribed to them the abuses of banking, and others to the transition from a state of war to a state of peace, overlooking the real cause, the destruction of the national industry, and likewise overlooking the strong fact that all nations have fallen to decay in proportion as they abandon and have prospered in proportion as they protected the industry of their people. Let us briefly examine both of these alleged causes of distress. It is impossible to defend the legislative bodies who incorporated such hosts of banks at once. They are deserving of the most unqualified censure, and it is to be regretted that they cannot be rendered individually responsible for the consequences. But the mischief that has arisen from those banks has been greatly overrated. I submit a few facts and reflections on the subject. With the state of Pennsylvania, I am more familiar than with any of the others, and shall therefore found my reasonings on the system pursued here. It will apply mutatis mutandis to all those which have carried banking to excess. In 1814, the legislature of this state incorporated 41 banks, of which only 37 went into operation. Of these, I present a view. 33 county banks, capital authorized 12 million, capital paid in 5 million. 4 city banks, 3.5 million, authorized, paid in 2.1 million. So total authorized 16 million, total paid in 7 million. 2 reports recently made to the legislature of Pennsylvania convey an idea that the capital of these banks was much greater than it really was. Quote, the people of Pennsylvania, during an expensive war and in the midst of great embarrassments, established 41 new banks with a capital of $17.5 million and authority to issue banknotes to double that amount. That's from a report to the House of Representatives. A bill authorizing the incorporation of 41 banking institutions with capitals amounting to upwards of $17 million was passed by a large majority. Several of them had been in operation previous to the act of incorporation, particularly the commercial bank in Philadelphia, with a capital of $1 million, and others with probably capitals of $750,000, so that the addition then made to the banking capital of the state was only about $5,700,000. It is perfectly obvious that in calculating the effects produced by these banks, we must have reference not to the capital authorized, but to that actually paid in. Had every one of these banks been fraudulently conducted and become bankrupt, would it account for the excessive distresses of the state? It would be idle to pretend it. The circumstance would have produced great temporary embarrassment, but our citizens would soon have recovered had their industry been protected. The population of the state is above 1.2 million. Yeah, 1.2. I'm saying that right. 1.2 million.
Yeah, 1.2 million.
It's late and I'm getting old. Its manufactures in 1810, as stated by Mr. Cox, were $32 million and had previously risen in 1814 to $45 million. Its domestic exports for the last 3 years have been above 20 million, or nearly 7 million per annum. Now, can it be believed that the specified increase of banking capital in a state with such great resources could have produced such ruinous consequences? Surely not. In cases of great calamities arising from embargoes, blockades, unexpected war, or peace, New York and Philadelphia have each suffered nearly as much loss as the whole capital of all those banks and speedily revived like the phoenix from her ashes. Let it be observed that after deducting the capitals of the Bank of Lancaster, 600,000, Marietta, 239,000, Pittsburgh, 316,000, Reading, 299,000, Easton, 211,000, total 1.6 million. The remaining country banks only average about $125,000 each. Some of them operate in a space of which the diameter is 30, 40, or 50 miles. Surely the doctor's apprentice, who, finding a saddle under his patient's bed, described his illness to his having devoured a horse, was not much more ludicrously in error than those who ascribe the whole or even the chief part of the sufferings of the state to this cause. By the way, 4 of these towns are places of importance and carry on trade very extensively. Let it be distinctly understood that I freely admit that some of those banks have done very great mischief, and that several have been improperly conducted. But had the industry of the state been protected and trade flourished, the great mass of them would have gone on prosperously, and the whole would not have produced 1/10 part of the injury that has resulted from those that have been ill-managed. Before I quit this subject, let me observe that the greater portion, by far, of these banks have been, I believe, fairly and honorably conducted, and that little inconvenience was felt by or from any of them, from the time of resuming specie payments till of late, when the unceasing drain of specie exhausted them of the pabulum on which banks are supported, and obliged them to diminish their issues and to press on their debtors, of whom many were ruined. Notwithstanding all their efforts, several of the banks have been obliged to stop payment. The idea that the public distresses have been a necessary consequence of the transition to a state of peace is still more extravagant. To Great Britain, the transition was truly formidable. She had, by her orders in council, blockades, and fleets, engrossed the supply of a large portion of the continent of Europe, which, on the return of peace, relied on itself, and therefore deprived her of various profitable markets. But I ask any man of common sense how this applies to our case. Were we, at the Treaty of Ghent, excluded from any foreign markets which we enjoyed during our short war? Surely not. Far from having our markets circumscribed by the transition to a state of peace, they were greatly enlarged. By 1815, our exports were, as appears below, 700% more than in 1814, and treble in the 3 entire years subsequent to the peace what they were in the 3 preceding years. Domestic exports from the United States, 1812, 30 million, 1813, 25 million, 1814, 6.7 million, for a total of 61 million and an average of 20 million. 1815, 45 million, 1816, 64 million, 1817, 68 million, total 179 million, average 59 million. At the transition from an average export of 20 million to nearly 60 million can account for the lamentable and precipitous fall we have experienced, no person of candor will pretend. It would be equally wise to assert that a man was ruined by raising his income from $2,000 to $6,000 per annum. If, however, he renounced his industry and, when he only trebled his income, increased his expenses 6-fold, then his ruin would be as easily accounted for as the lamentable picture this country exhibits. I was, however, in error. The transition did produce the effect. Should it be asked how? I reply, the war protected the domestic industry of the nation. It throve and prospered under that safeguard, which the peace tore down. Défense en calme. How's my French? And Congress whose imperious and paramount duty it was to step in and replace the protection, failed of that duty. The consequences were foretold. The industry of the country was laid prostrate, its circulating medium drained away, its resources exhausted, and distress overspread the face of the land. But it is too farcical for argument to assert that a peace which trebled our exports necessarily brought on a state of distress and impoverishment, which is chargeable wholly to our short-sighted policy.
Susie, I noticed you have your digital hand up.
Yeah, I should have spoke up when the question was being discussed a few minutes ago, but basically the cause is that they were deceived and manipulated into letting go of protectionism, because protectionism protects your own industry and enables them to, have a fair place in the market instead of being sold out to cheaper goods.
Yes, protectionism enacts tariffs against foreign imports, and so it allows for your own manufacturing to move ahead because it doesn't face the competition from
Right.
at this
Right.
time from all these cheap imports from Britain. Nowadays,
So
it's cheap imports from China, but actually, like China is developing to such an extent that they're actually talking about moving manufacturing away from China because wages are getting too high in China. China's, one of the nations that's adopting a lot of the American system principles these days, and they're the advanced manufacturing of the world is largely done in China now. They're not just manufacturing really, cheap baubles anymore, but they're coming out with a 600-kilometer-an-hour maglev train system pretty shortly, just as one example.
so I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So at this time in history, are not enough people truly understanding the principle of protectionism versus free trade? Or is it just that there are so many people that are actually working for the empire and not the US? Or is it both things happening at the same time?
Well, yeah, so it's both things. So there's networks that are allied with the British, particularly in
Right.
the South. The South is very pro free trade, and the South is a very strong bloc in American politics. But also that through newspapers that are friendly to this ideology, the people are deceived into endorsing their own destruction, saying that
Right.
we'll be better off without protectionism. Prices will go down. William
Yeah,
McKinley,
everybody loves shopping at Walmart.
exactly. I mean, it's exact same parallel to today. And William McKinley has a phenomenal quote about buying where you can purchase the cheapest, and what he says is, I prefer the maxim of buying where you can afford to pay the easiest, and that spot of earth is where labor earns its highest reward. So in other words, he's arguing for advanced manufacturing, which tends to be very high wage labor. And so it's not about having the lowest prices, it's about being able to pay the easiest. Because, if prices are double, but your wage is triple, it's actually easier for you to afford that thing.
But
I noticed
Thank
that
you.
both Arlen and Helen are waiting, but Arlen, it looks like you're gonna leap out of your skin. So why don't you ask your question?
okay, so on the commentary about paying, I can't remember the exact wording, but paying where you're best able to afford, or whatever it was, where you're earning triple. It's that if the income from the sale remains in the community that then supports your ability to have triple your wage, that's an integral part of that argument. And the dilemma of the comment made earlier about the free, was it free economy? Anyway,
free trade, yeah.
Well, free trade, but the notion that in a ideal capitalist marketplace, it's an open market, and you have a free trade in that John down the road is selling his grain for $5, and Bill down the other road is selling his grain for $4, and I'll buy it for $4 because it's the same grain, it's just as good, I'll buy it cheaper. But the dilemma is we're so far removed from that notion that the things that are coming from China, the things that are coming, again, I don't know how this overlays directly into this period of 1815 to 1820, but that right now there is no free market. It is not a free market. Every commodity that is being exchanged is being manipulated in some way, if not utterly, completely. The best example I have for this is a very brief story, in that a American furniture manufacturer is at a trade show in, I believe, Vegas. This goes back probably more than 20 years ago. And there's a furniture, actually back to the late 80s. There's a furniture manufacturer from China, and the guy that is from Kentucky or some southern states, whatever, their family business for 80 years.
Baker Furniture is very famous.
Anyway, he goes and looks at this booth, and he sees what they're making, and he gets to know one of the Chinese representatives, and he says, well, hey, can I take you out for dinner? And so they get together and they have a little chat, and the American, who's a family-owned business proprietor, who knows his business and is doing a good job at making a good product at a reasonable rate of markup and all of that, says to this Chinese guy, okay, so I wholesale that item for, let's say, $800, and you've got virtually the exact same item for $300. He says, when I buy the wood, just the wood, the materials to build the chest of drawers, my cost is over $300. How are you making any money selling that in a different country, coming across the ocean and selling it for $300? And his answer was very simple. We're not making any money. It's the price of doing business. What it really meant was, we're putting you out of business so people will buy from us. So that's where the point about the thing about paying to the proprietor, to the seller, that which, sorry, Sam, what could you repeat that phrase?
Where you can buy the easiest.
Right.
Buy and that the spot easiest. Is where labor earns its highest reward. That's right. From McKinley.
Right. And that is an ideal that I wish people could actually adhere to, and intelligently go out into the world and execute the exchanges that they do. But the dilemma is that when you have the Walmart mentality, and when you have this Chinese manufacturer, not picking on the Chinese, I don't mean to do that, it's just the example that is real, where they're coming in it's
predatory.
Well, it's predatory, and it is actually to put the other company out of business. And then the issue is, who's paying the wages and who's paying the factory to build that piece of furniture? If the wood in China, if the wood costs $300, or whatever the value is, where's the profit? Where's the dollars coming from to sustain that industry, to put the Americans out of business? And that's the falsity of a free market economy.
You see, and then it's even worse, because it's not just to put Baker Furniture out of business. It's to actually infiltrate America slowly, and over time they play the long game. And now they've got a foothold. The economy's bad. America, Canada, I've said this forever, we don't make anything anymore. All of our jeans and things that Canada was famous for is gone.
We're from Canada.
Yeah, we're from Canada. So it's this predatory thing where, they've got their feet in everybody's door. And it's the long game of takeover without war. Read, The Art of War. You don't have to have an actual battle. You just go in and take over all their little industries and then sell them cheap crap.
Well, I hope you see from the point of reading this is that this is like a universal theme throughout history,
Yes.
and that
Yes.
this protectionist policies are the solution. That companies from foreign lands should not be allowed to do that. They
The question.
the
Sorry for-
sophist arguments against it. I was just going to say,
Sam,
like,
can you say, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Susan.
Can you say again that phrase or sentence about where it's easiest to buy?
Easiest to pay.
Yeah. Just give me a sec. I'll find the exact quote.
No, it's from a different. McKinley, you said.
No, buying
Because
Yeah.
when
what
you
I
can
really hear
Yeah.
in that
Quan,
phrase,
I think has the quote there.
buying when you can afford to pay the easiest.
what I really hear in that sentence is also ease of conscience that I think has just been so lost today. We are so disconnected from our conscience.
Yeah.
But the ideas are coming back of know what you're buying, especially in the area of food, but know where it comes from. So you know some of the values and ethics behind how it was produced. And we need to never let go of that again.
Yeah, but I want to
Okay,
take
so
10
I have it
seconds.
for you, Susan. Okay, Quan, go ahead, and then
Okay.
I'll read it for
Okay,
Susan.
no, Sam, read first the excerpt, and I will take 10 seconds after.
Okay, so this is from William McKinley, a speech in Boston, October 4th, 1892. He said, under free trade, the trader is the master and producer the slave. Protection is but the law of nature, the law of self-preservation, of self-development, of securing the highest and best destiny of the race of man. It is said that protection is immoral. Why? If protection builds up and elevates 63 million of people, the US population, the influence of those 63 million people elevates the rest of the world. We cannot take a step in the pathway of progress without benefiting mankind everywhere. Well, they say, buy where you can buy the cheapest. Of course, that applies to labor as to everything else. Let me give you a maxim that is 1,000 times better than that, and it is the protection maxim. Buy where you can pay the easiest, and that spot of earth is where labor wins its highest rewards.
Yeah.
I'd make a comment about the Chinese situation too. I mean, I'm not suggesting Arlen was implying that the success of China was a well thought out plan from on high. I would suggest that an awful lot of it happened kind of accidentally, and it fits in with what you're just saying there, Sam, that there's a universal law here.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to come back to what the Sam said. Okay, buying when you can afford to pay the easiest. And I remember, Sam, that you gave a practical example 15 minutes ago that I think is perfect. For example, if the prices are ×2 and the wages are ×3, the people having the wages ×3 would be capable to afford to buy the objects with the price of ×2. And I would say that the perfect example is the contrast between what I would call, for simplification, the financial capitalist and the industrial capitalist, okay? Because it's well known that Henry Ford, for example, wanted to pay his workers a good wages, for they would be capable to afford to buy his automobiles or their automobiles. So I think that's example, it is perfect illustration of the maxim buying when you can afford to pay the easiest, because your wages are higher than the prices of the stuff. Concerning the Chinese, I will take 30 seconds. I promise it will be 30 seconds. There is a purposeful oligarchy ruling China, okay? Meaning that they have specific national goals that they want to develop China, and first and foremost by offering to the Chinese population a good epistemological development, meaning, more simply said, a good education. And that is the prime engine of the development of China, combined with certain opportunities that has been offered because of the international situation in the last 50 years, of course. The Chinese, in reality, in the last 50 years, developed what is called in technical terms, the supply chains. Okay, so when you have the experience and the skill to control the supply chains, it means that prices wouldn't go down because the object that you make would be controlled, if you want, by you, because you wouldn't get the commodities, the work, and the shipping and the selling in a kind of integrated system, if you want.
Vertically.
Okay. So because of that integrated system of supply chain that the Chinese developed in Asia and in the home world, that is one of the reasons of their success. However, under that technical instrument, there is also a desire to uplift epistemologically the Chinese people, the Asian people working with the Chinese companies, and everyone in the whole world. Okay, so the example of Africa is the best because Africa is the continent having the less, let's say, technical and industrial development. Okay, if you read about Ethiopia, for example, the Chinese contributed a lot to the industrial development of Ethiopia. I just want to come back to the West. And here, maybe it's better to talk about that later on, because I don't want to slow down the rhythm of the reading. I just want to say that politics is above economy, but if we can talk after, I will certainly develop more on my idea. I stop here.
I know Helen was waiting for a long time. Do you still have your thought, Helen, or did you want to?
Oh, yes. So it's about China, and I was hoping that maybe somebody answered it, but so Sam, you mentioned that China is actually going outside the country, and I've recently heard Senegal, and I've heard in Belarus, and so my question is really just about, is the government like involved in the companies? Are they partnered with the companies, or do they just make the arrangement for their companies to partner with companies in other countries? I guess so. I'm looking at the structure, so I'm just wondering if anybody knows that.
I know the answer.
Okay.
So about 60% of what I call the international Chinese ventures with private company. And I would say even 75%. Mm-hmm. I would take the continent that is very developed by the Chinese, meaning Africa. The Chinese company would go there as private company. And one of the things that is not very well known is that the Chinese economy is made by 70% of private properties and 30% of state-owned enterprise. And when the company is going outside of China, those companies are private companies. Some of them are supported by the Chinese government, especially those that are involved in infrastructural building, okay? Which is well known that the Chinese are understood perfectly that if you want to develop an economy, especially a backward economy, you have first to start with the construction of infrastructures, meaning roads, railroad, airport, harbor, sometimes school or hospitals, things like that, before you can have an economy per se.
Okay, so you're saying the structural type stuff is going to be the government partnered, Chinese government partnered, more likely, you're saying, right?
No. Most of the time,
it's private.
Most of the time, 70% to 75%, they are private companies owned by private individuals. the Chinese economy is about 30% of state-owned enterprise. Okay, 70 to 75% of the Chinese economy is medium-sized companies owned by private persons.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that overthrows. There's a lot of misconception about China is this like totalitarian fascist commie state where nobody's allowed to own anything. And when you look at the amount of private ownership and private entrepreneurs, and you compare it to the collapse of all of the once proud private, small and medium businesses that were the lifeblood of the West, it's embarrassing. It's completely shocking. They're more capitalist in that sense than we are at this point. It's crazy.
It's
Yes.
good to know because, the whole, China bad type thing. So when you talk to people, that's why I was just wondering about that.
Yeah. However, I want to add a nuance. In China, you have perfect economic freedom, but it's true that China doesn't have a political system resembling to the West. Okay, there is no electoral system in China, right? And I don't want to go too deep in that because the question is democracy only incarnated by an electoral system, or is democracy, meaning the power of the people, can be expressed by another procedure than electoral system? Okay, because we understand that in the electoral system, it would be very easy to manipulate a dumbed down population. So I don't have the answer. I asked the question.
No, I think I mean, that's a 2 hour conversation just on its own. That's a fascinating um, question that you're asking, and that like one I would love to have with you, Kwon, because I'm sure there's a tremendous amount of insight that you can bring. Um, just I have a couple of things to say on her question, though. Number one, I have a good friend of mine who is very much a libertarian capitalist who's been living in China for several years now and absolutely loves China, will not come back to the West, first of all, talks all the time about how much freedom there is in China, actually. And like, he was just back here for his wedding. He got married to a Chinese girl and they came here to get married. And I just saw him a month or two ago. And a number of my friends were coming up to him and asking about, what it's like living under communism and you can't, start your own business. And he would, shut them down immediately. Others would come up to him and say, do you have a social credit score? Are you always constantly being monitored? And he would shut that down and say, I've never encountered a social credit system in all my time in China. Um, and then it's important to remember that, like during the 90s and the early 2000s, China was really the darling of these financial parasites, that their
Oh
whole
yeah.
model was China will continue to be this like vassal state of ours, manufacturing at very, very low wages forever. And they'll just supply us in our dollar stores with never ending cheap goods. And it was when leaders like Xi Jinping broke with that system and said, no, we're going to develop our economy and promote the most advanced economy that we possibly can, that wages started to rise. I mean, the UN Millennium Goals for eradicating poverty worldwide were accomplished almost solely because of China. 800 million people raised out of poverty in China. Um, that now you have George Soros saying that Xi Jinping is the greatest threat in the world. That then they became the greatest enemy because of the policies they're pursuing, and a lot of them have a lot of parallels to the American system. Like China has a number of state banks for infrastructure development, for development of agriculture, for development of manufacturing. China has a number of tariffs. It protects its economy in a myriad of ways, and issues bounties and other support for advanced manufacturing. So China has adopted a lot of American system principles.
Yeah, and the American system is the system of sovereign nations, okay? And if you have a sovereign nation in this world in 2023, well, I might be biased, but I would name China in number one position.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And you're right. That is the point. The whole point of the economic system is to develop a sovereign nation. And you can't be a sovereign nation if you can't manufacture for yourself. And something Arlen was saying also that was important was all the ancillary benefits as well. It's not just about promoting manufacturing, but it's when you develop a domestic industry in a domestic market, and then you have all kinds of other spin-offs as well, which when you have technological progress that then gets translated to farmers, just as one example. And farmers get the advantages of industry and mechanization, and the prices of food come down, the productivity of farms goes up. There's all kinds of other benefits as well. It's not just for the manufacturing sector.
You saw that, saw that in Australia. The start of the 20th century, the development of rail, particularly along the east coast of Australia, which united, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, vast distances between those cities. Once you have rail, all of a sudden, it's all of the benefits flow to the farmers, to the producers along the line.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, it really was a massive stimulus to the whole of Australia, and a large part of it, not all of it, but a large part of it was government funded.
Yeah, and history is ironical, okay, because you all know that the acronym BRICS has been invented by Jim O'Neill of the Goldman Sachs Bank just to flatter the so-called emerging economy 20 years ago and to make people buy their stuff. But nowadays, you have the original 5 nations plus 6 new nations in the BRIC, and they form precisely what I call, maybe in a very grandiose manner, the coalition of the sovereign states. And that is the power of that group, okay? The idea of the sovereign nation.
Yeah, it's making a big
Sam,
comeback, Juan.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Susie, what go for it.
Sam, I so wish I could have a conversation with your friend, and we need to find more and more ways of putting the voices out there of the people that are actually boots on the ground living through these situations. Just like Matt and Cynthia's work breaking free of anti-China psyops, we need to help more people understand so they don't just fall into the bucket of China, communist, bad. Because I still find so many people that I talk to in the church that are just falling for the propaganda and have no idea how to look at the real issues of what's going on.
Yep,
we are
exactly.
being lied to on every front, and we have got to educate ourselves and really gain some discernment about what's really happening and the principles that actually work.
Susie, you should ask your friend to make a massive petition to send to Beijing, asking them to change the Chinese Communist Party to the Chinese Civilization Party. I think it would help.
Well, that name does throw people off. It's yeah. I got a question, Sam. Do you think we should read another chapter here, or what do you recommend?
I'm down for it. Yeah, I
they're
think
pretty
Paul.
short chapters.
Yeah, Paul, this one's pretty short, and then if we could do 12, we'd accomplish my goal. Anyway, we'll see how we do.
Okay.
But I
So
really
want
do want to just really thank you guys for a very rich discussion.
We're
Thank
not
you for
done
being
yet.
here.
I want to thank everybody too. I got to sign off.
All right, dude.
Look forward to watching the rest of it when it's posted.
All right, see you, Bruce.
Great discussion.
Bruce, thank you.
Trio, man.
Nice to hear your voice again, Bruce.
Yeah.
Nice to hear and see you too, Paul.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
So you want me to read chapter 11?
Sure.
Okay, away we go. The everlasting complaint of taxing the many for the benefit of the few. Fallacy and injustice of it, Amount of impost for 14 years. For the year 1818. Impost for the protection of agriculture in that year above $4.5 million. The changes have been rung throughout the United States since the commencement of the government on the immensity of the favours conferred on the manufacturers in point of protection, their insatiable temper, the impossibility of satisfying them, and the dreadful injustice of taxing the many for the benefit of the few, which has been used as a sort of war whoop for exciting all the base passions of avarice and selfishness in battle array against those to whom the tax is supposed to be paid. Need to scroll up, Matt.
Yep.
It rarely happens in private life that vociferous claims for gratitude can stand the test of inquiry. When weighed in the balance of justice and truth, they are uniformly found wanting. And as a public is an aggregation of individuals acted upon by the same views and liable to the same and greater errors, it would be extraordinary if similar claims of collections of people were not found to rest on Sandy as a foundation. As Sandy a foundation. To investigate the correctness of this everlasting theme has become a duty. To place the subject on its true ground will dispel a dense mist of error and delusion with which it is enveloped. If the debt can be paid, let it, in the name of heaven, be discharged, and let us commence de novo. If it be beyond the power of payment, let the delinquent parties take the benefit of the Insolvent Act and exonerate themselves from a load by which they are crushed as between the upper and the nether millstone. The expenses of our government require revenues which have risen from $4 million to $27 million per annum. Provision must be made for this sum in one or all of three modes: by excise, direct taxes, or customs. The first is universally abhorred here. I note for interest that income tax was never included there, I think. The first is universally abhorred here. The second are almost equally obnoxious. It therefore follows that the impost is the next and grand resource. The sum required must be raised without regard to manufactures or manufacturers. And indeed, if there were not a manufacturer in the country, it is out of the power of the government to raise the necessary revenue without laying considerable duties on manufactures, as all other duties, such as tea, sugar, wines, coffee, are dutied as high as they will bear. Therefore, the manufacturers who, let it be observed, bear their own share of all these duties of every description are under no obligation of gratitude whatever for them. The duties, of course, will be on all of their inputs. Let us examine the subject more closely. Let us suppose that these duties had been laid solely to serve the manufacturers, without any regard to the emergencies of government, and that the proceeds had been reserved in the treasury. Let us see what would be the extent of the mighty boon. The whole of this enormous and inextinguishable debt is comprised in the duties imposed on such foreign merchandise as would rival our own manufactures. The utmost cravings on the score of gratitude will not dare to charge to the account the duties on sugar, coffee, tea, wine, salt, etc. And here we have a list of such things. The entire impost for 14 years, 1801 to 1814, was close enough to 160 million. And there's a list of all of the things, of course. Leaving a balance of 71 million, to which half the last item of sundries is probably on manufacturers. So total 75. This is the whole amount levied on manufacturers of every kind for 14 years, being about 5 millions and a half per annum. The white population of that period averaged probably about 7 million. Of course, the duties paid on manufacturers amounted to about 80 cents per head. And this is the sum and substance of the taxes levied on the many by the few, and the immense favours conferred on the few by the many, which have furnished matter for so many tedious speeches in Congress, tiresome declamations at public meetings, and verbose newspaper essays and paragraphs, without end or number.
I just want to make sure everyone understands, like, this argument of the taxation of the many for the benefit of the few is like the primary argument of the free trade faction, used again and again and again. This like sophistry that they would employ, and it goes back to what we were saying about manipulation of public opinion so that people support their own destruction. That's what he's arguing against. I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah. Continuing, with which the welcome has rung, and which I repeat have called into activity all the base passions of our nature, and excited a deadly hostility in the minds of one portion of our citizens against another. The clamour would have been contemptible had the whole sum been granted as an alms or through generosity. But when it is considered that every dollar of this sum has been raised for the mere purpose of revenue, language cannot do justice to the feelings the affair is calculated to excite. I shall now consider the subject at a more recent period. The whole amount of duties ad valorem for 1818 was nearly 12 million, to which added for manufacturers of lead, iron and steel, glass bottles, copperas, alum and other subjects subject to specific duties, nearly 700,000. Total on manufacturers is 12.5 million. A large portion of those duties was levied on silks, high-priced linens, lace shawls, lace veils, etc., which our citizens do not manufacture. These duties are by no means chargeable to the protection of manufactures. Suppose 1.5 million. The balance of imposts supposed for protection of manufactures is just over 11 million. Against this, we must set off all the duties levied for the protection of agriculture, namely, viz. On spirits for the encouragement of the culture of grain and the protection of the peach brandies, rye whiskey, etc. of the farmers. I'm just going to read through the list. Sugar, cotton, hemp, indigo, coals, cheese, imposts for the protection of agriculture, 4.5 million, leaving a balance against the manufacturers of 6.5 million. When we consider how frugal and economical the great body of our farmers are in the eastern, middle and western states, how few of them, comparatively speaking, purchased imported articles except groceries, and how expensively the inhabitants of our cities and towns live in general, it will appear more than probable that of the goods on which the above duties are collected, not nearly 1/2 are consumed by farmers. A view of the preceding tables and statements affords the following results: that the whole amount of the duties levied on manufactured articles of every description for the year 1818, having been only about $12.5 million, and the population of the United States at present being about 10 million, of whom probably 8 are white, the average is only about $1.50 for the white population. That of this amount, about 1/8 part is levied on articles not interfering with our manufactures. That there are duties levied in favour of agriculture equal in amount to more than 1/3 part of those levied on manufactures. That when the latter duties are set off against those levied for the protection of manufactures, the remainder is about 75 cents for each free person in the United States. That probably more than half of the goods on which those duties are levied are consumed in towns and cities, and of course that the amount paid by the farmers and planters is not above 60 cents per head, notwithstanding the senseless and illiberal clamour excited on the subject. That were all the duties on manufactured articles removed, the burdens of the community would not be diminished a single dollar, as there is no more revenue raised than the emergencies of the government require, and of course some other tax or duty must be devised.
Oh, that was quick. Holy shit.
Yeah, short chapter.
Okay. So Sam, what do you think? Do we go on to the last?
I think so, yeah. Unless anybody wanted to say anything, I think that the point of that chapter was pretty straightforward. But yeah, I'm down to do chapter 12. It's maybe 4 or 5 pages longer than that. I don't think it's too long of one. And yeah, I think we stop there, and then I know chapter 13 is a good one, so it's a good place to start next week if we continue this next week.
All right.
Okay, let's plow on. Chapter 12. immense advantages enjoyed by the farmers and planters for nearly 30 years, viz. A domestic monopoly and excellent foreign markets, exorbitant prices of the necessaries of life, great extent of the domestic market, internal trade of the United States. For nearly 30 years, the farmers and planters of this country enjoyed a high degree of prosperity. They had almost universally excellent foreign markets for all their productions, and from the commencement of the government have had a monopoly of the domestic market, having had the exclusive supply of the manufacturers who have not consumed of foreign vegetables, breadstuffs, butchers' meats, fowls, fuel, or any other of the productions of agriculture to the amount of 1% per annum. It is nevertheless a fact, however incredible, that those citizens enjoying this important domestic monopoly and having laid very high duties on all the articles that interfere with their interests, as snuff, tobacco, cotton, hemp, cheese, coals, etc., accuse their manufacturing fellow citizens as monopolists, who are not only shut out of nearly all the foreign markets in the world by prohibitions and prohibitory duties, but even in their own markets are exposed to and supplanted by foreign adventures of all countries. It is difficult to conceive of a more unjust charge or one that comes with a worse grace from the accusers. During this long period, the farmers sold in all cases at high and in many at most exorbitant prices. To instance a few articles, in order to illustrate the remark, we paid them $10 and $12 and $13 a barrel for flour, 12 to 18 cents per pound for beef and pork, 12 to 14 cents for tobacco, 15 to 30 cents for cotton. And in the same proportion for all other productions, though it is well known they could have afforded them at half those prices and made handsome profits. In one word, the history of the world affords few, if any, instances of such a long-continued scene of prosperity as they enjoyed. The manufacturers cheerfully paid those prices. The cotton weaver, the smith, the shoemaker, the carpenter, the labourer, who earned $6, $7, or $8 per week, never lisped a word of complaint when they paid $12 or $13 per barrel for flour, 8 or 10 cents per pound for mutton, etc., etc. Would to heaven they had experienced the same degree of liberality from their farming and planting fellow citizens, which, alas, they have not. It remains to ascertain the effect of this monopoly in favour of the agricultural fellow citizens, which our manufacturers have for 30 years afforded them without the least murmur. It is impossible to ascertain with precision the number of our citizens engaged in manufactures with their families. The census is miserably defective in this respect. It does not furnish the population of the towns and cities, which would afford a tolerable criteria. We are therefore left to mere estimate. The highest number that I have ever heard surmised is 2 millions, the lowest 1. Truth, as is generally the case, may lie in the medium. I will therefore assume 1.5 million. As there may be some objections on the subject of the number thus assumed, I annex the ground on which it rests. I suppose, as I have stated, the white population of the country to be about 8 millions and to be proportioned as follows. 10/16 agriculturalists, 5 million. 3/16 artists, mechanics, manufacturers, 1.5. 3/16 professor of law and physic, gentlemen who live on their income, merchants, traders, seamen, 1.5, for a total of 8. I believe I would not have been wide of the mark in adding 500,000 to the second item and deducting 250,000 from each of the others, but I prefer taking ground as little as possible liable to cavil. Diron, an eminent English statistical writer, estimates the average annual consumption of grain in England at 2 quarters or 16 bushels for each person. Won't worry about the footnote. Colquhoun, strange to tell, estimates it at only 1 quarter. I will assume the medium of 12 bushels. At this rate, the consumption of the manufacturers would be about 18 million of bushels per annum. The average price of wheat in the United States during the wars of the French Revolution was about $1.75 per bushel. For the last 2 years, it has been about $1.25. At this rate, the amount of grain would be $22.5 million. Durham states the average daily consumption of flesh meat in Paris at about 5 ounces and 3/4 for each person. An average for London, he supposes, probably more than double that amount, or 11.5, which is about £5 per week. As our citizens eat meat oftener and our working people more generally than those of most other nations, it will be fair to assume £6 per week for each person, which is equal to about £312.50 per annum. At 8 cents per pound, a moderate average till lately, this amounts to $25 per annum, or for the whole, $37.5 million. Allowing for milk, butter, eggs, vegetables, fruit, lard, firewood, coals, homemade spirits, etc., $1 per week, it amounts to $78 million. There's a summary of that there. Consumption of the manufacturers in total, 138 million. Now, this is the market for bare subsistence of which the manufacturers furnish a monopoly to their agricultural fellow citizens, who have uniformly regarded them with jealousy and murmuring, often with decided hostility, and who have always assumed that duties imperiously required for the purposes of the Treasury are favours conferred on manufacturers. That this calculation is not materially wrong will appear from the following view. $0.25 per day, or $1.75 per week for the maintenance of each individual, which, as our citizens live, is moderate, would amount to $91 per annum, or for 1,500,000 people, about 136.5 million. Let me further observe that this is a market which might have been immensely increased annually by immigration, had a sound policy held out any encouragement to invite the manufacturers of Europe. It is not easy to calculate the extent of the market for raw materials which the manufacturers afford their agricultural fellow citizens, and which might have been doubled by a correct system. I will state what I suppose it must have been in 1815, previous to the prostration of manufacturers. Cotton, 9 million, wool, 10 million, hemp, 2 million, hides, etc., 8 million, a total of 29. Bought forward for sustenance, 138 million, total 167 million. As the illiberal prejudices that prevail on this topic tend to excite jealousies and disgusts that may eventually prove dangerous to the harmony of the nation, too much pains cannot be taken to remove them. I shall therefore place the subject before the reader in a new and not less striking point of view. I have shown that the market afforded to their agricultural fellow citizens by the manufacturers amounts per annum to 167 million. It is proper to examine the extent of the market reciprocated to them. It may be assumed that each white person in the Union consumes in furniture and clothing at the average rate of $40 per annum. This, for the whole of the agriculturalists, whom I have estimated at 5 million, amounts to 200 million. And for the slaves, supposed to be 1.5 million at $15 per head, 22.5. Per contra, 222.5 million. One half the farmers throughout the Union make 3/4 of their own clothing, which is equal to 75 million. The remaining half probably manufacture about 1/3 of their clothing, equal to 33 million. The clothing for the slaves is principally of family fabrics. This would warrant the deduction of the whole 22.5 million. But I suppose the planters may purchase to the average amount of $5 for each slave. This is 7.5 million, which leaves of family fabrics 15 million. Total amount of household fabrics consumed by the agriculturalists is 123 million, leaving the amount of clothing and furniture purchased by them at 99.5 million. Of this amount, probably 10% is of foreign manufacture, nearly 10 million. One half of the manufacturers, say 750,000, live in country towns or in the country and purchase probably one half of their clothing from the farmers in the neighbourhood, say 15 million. The total there is 24,950 million. Balance being the whole of the consumption of articles purchased by manufacturers by agriculturalists of 74,550 million. It thus appears, notwithstanding the clamour against the manufacturers, that they purchase of the agriculturalists nearly $100 million more than the latter purchase of them. The contrast between the domestic exports and the internal trade of the nation cannot fail to be interesting, as it will enable us to ascertain whether they have borne in the minds of our citizens and statesmen the comparative rank to which they are entitled. The domestic exports of the United States for 24 years, from 1796 to 1819, inclusive $955,586,088. An average, that would be an annual average, of 39.8 million. I shall proceed on the assumptions which I have already ventured, that the agriculturalists embrace about 5 million of our white population, that all the other classes who are consumers of the productions of the farmers and planters are 3 million, and that each of the latter consumes to the amount of $1.75 per week in food and drink. Let us see the result. 3 million of people at $1.75 per week equal to 5,250,000 per week, or per annum, 273 million. Once more, our present population, about 8 million whites and 1.5 million blacks. The average expenditure of $40 per annum, already assumed for 8 million of white people, amounts to 320 million, and 1.5 million slaves, 22.5 million, of which we import, sorry, the total there is 345,500, of which we import about 60 million. Leaving a balance furnished by our own industry of 285.5 million, to which add the sum above for food and drink, 273 million, it gives a total of 558.5 million, raw materials as before, 29 million, annual internal trade of the United States, 587.5 million. What exhilarating views. The domestic market for food and drink is nearly 700, and the internal trade 1,500% more than the average of our exports. How infinitely more worthy of the attention of our citizens and to be protected by our statesmen than they have appeared. How transcendently superior to that foreign commerce which has been fostered with so much care, has excited so many collisions with foreign powers, cost us so much for foreign embassies, navy and war, and entail on us so heavy a national debt. Again, our farmers will be astonished to learn that the consumption of Philadelphia in food and drink, supposing the population 125,000 persons, is very nearly equal to the amount of all the eatable articles exported from this country to every quarter of the world. 125,000 peoples at $1.75 per week comes to the amount per annum of 11,375,000. Total exports from the United States for 1819 of the following articles: hams, 10,000, pork.
The customs house valuation, Sam, is that the money we get, the revenue we get from the tariff, the tax, or is it something else?
So.
Exports from the United States. No, it's exports from the United States.
So the tariff or the duties that are charged are based on the valuation estimated by the customs house, if I'm not mistaken. So it's the value that is ascribed to it, which is then charged a duty.
Yeah.
Okay.
Total carried forward there is 1.143421 million. Okay.
You don't have to read all of that, man.
No, I'm not going to read all of it. If I notice any significant figures, I'll draw them to your attention, but nothing else.
This is the last page, though.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, there's an awful lot of them. Agricultural products, that's for sure. Indian corn, 815, and flour, 6.5 million. Rice in America. Okay, total of eatable articles is 12,147,339.
Oh, that's it. That's literally it. Okay.
Yeah. So he's arguing there what a huge domestic market there for all these goods, equal to everything that was exported all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So and what a benefit it is to develop your own domestic economy.
Yeah. I think he's arguing by inference too that we're tariffs and everything else freely available to the government to issue, etc. That domestic market would have been much more profitable,
much greater. Yeah. That Alexander Hamilton made that exact argument that he said, now showing that I'm trying to remember the exact quote, but he says in the report on manufacturers, now having shown that an economy based on um, agriculture is equal to an economy based on manufacturing, I will now endeavor to show that an economy with agriculture and manufacturing is of a type even more superior, that there are ancillary benefits to both by encouraging advanced manufacturing in your society that pass on to the other sectors of society as well. And this is the development of this harmony of interest that is very anti-Marxist, and this is why Marx hated Henry Carey so much. That that Marx's class war view of like the war of all against all, again, very much in line with British ideology, where Marx lived much of his life. But that I feel this is a much more beautiful ideology personally, and much more inspiring.
What was Marx's views in contrast to this here?
Well, Marx argued all of history is class warfare, and that all classes are permanently at war with each other, and that
I see.
Based on the ownership of the means of production.
that was his solution. Yeah, that the proletariat, the revolution of the proletariat, to take over the means of production. Yeah,
and and bring in like wage and price controls, things like that.
Yeah, that sort of came with Lenin and Soviet communism. And Soviet communism was kind of a mishmash as well, because Marx actually like argued that under communism the state will like wither away and die, and it wasn't exactly clear how that would happen, but that was Marx's theory. And of course, as we know, under the Soviet system that didn't happen at all, quite the opposite.
Yeah. Well, I think that the guy didn't have any notion of basic or primary psychology, because if you have an oligarchy taking the power, why would that oligarchy be different from the old oligarchy?
Right. Yeah. Marx was a very controlled individual. I mean, from Engels to David Urquhart, he had a number of handlers who, and he just psychologically he had a lot of issues. He lived in squalor and filth most of his life. He never had any money. All of his money was immediately spent. Um, Engels basically propped him up for much of his life.
Yeah. Well, he was in a, let's say, practical circumstances that is prone to be manipulated because of his physical needs, precisely.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
But just thinking about your statement about class warfare makes me think about, is it Plato or Socrates talking to the slave boy and
Socrates.
enlightening his mind? And that shows the reality of what we are all capable of.
Mm-hmm.
The class warfare is a false construct.
yeah. It's not the main stuff. I would say that everyone would be capable to uplift himself or herself to the epistemological level of an aristocrat, not in the sense of hereditary nobility, but in the sense of the quality of a superior mind.
In the Greek sense of aristo, like the best, right? The best of society, yes. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So sometimes I have the weakness to use the expression aristocratic oligarchy, but I'm not speaking of hereditary nobility. I'm speaking of the people making the effort to make themselves worthy to be rulers.
Right. In the Platonic sense of the word.
Yes, exactly.
So as we literally enter into a new renaissance, and we are overcoming limits to growth, and mankind is once again empowered for problem solving. Can we put new pieces into the system that make it more difficult for greed to prosper?
Well,
or we
well,
can just do what my husband wants to do. He wants to buy an island and put a great big sign at the entrance, no stupid people allowed.
Okay, so I have a question for you, Susan. Who would be the guy that would make the test to see if that person is stupid or not?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that would be my husband, of course. I think he has earned the right. He has paid the price.
Okay, but your answer is very interesting. Okay, we go back to the question: who are the guardians? Okay,
yeah.
And who will check the guardians?
Yeah.
And if you want a good summary of all of that, in the sidebar on the Telegram RTF channel that's been going, that started basically when we did the Kepler thing, there's a wonderful summary of all of that by Kwan.
Oh man.
It's just a summary, Kwan, and it's written, rather than an article that you have to access on another site or anything like that. It's in the Telegram page, and
is that
a summary of everything that we discussed. And it was heavy-duty discussions too, with Kepler and your ideas on epistemology and everything like that. I thought that was a really good overview. All the notes that I took during those Kepler things, I'm sitting there thinking I can throw those notes away now and just reference that page.
Yeah. And I think that one of the good things that is happening within Rising Tide Foundation, that is precisely, we don't separate the moral question to the exploration for knowledge question, okay? Or if to talk in technical words, political sciences are not separated from natural sciences, okay? Because it's the same epistemological journey, precisely.
They can't be separated. If you
never could.
do separate them, you just have systems of death. And that just cannot continue.
Well, a system of control. Because I often repeat the same stuff, but we all have the plutocratic man in us, okay? Given the right circumstances, the temptation to be in control and to be with a group of bodies controlling the other exists in all of us. And unless you go above that, it will never be solved. Because yes, they are the plutocrats nowadays who are manipulating people, of course. But if they can be manipulated, it's because they have the plutocratic man inside themselves.
Kwan, what do you feel the origin of the plutocratic man that is within, with your claim, within each of us? Where does that source? How does that present? What is that?
What is that? Is the source is a lack of education, because education, once again, is educare, to bring forth what is from within, meaning the timeless form of beauty, goodness, and truth. So if you are not, if you did not develop your mind, especially when you are very young, let's say before age 10, it's not impossible after, but it's a little bit more difficult after. You have to make your soul open to the idea of exploration and of creativity, okay? Because if you don't have joy in your life coming from creation, or so, from love, from true friendship, you will go to the substitute. And the substitute is accumulation of power and wealth. So, and that's exactly the society of consumption, okay? Because what is a society of consumption? Is that you would go to a job that you hate, and because you would have the consolation to get some money to buy some entertainment. And for the most skillful among us, we would be capable to accumulate the wealth and power. But that would not be the solution if we have been drilled, if I may use the word drill, or exposed or introduced to a life of creativity and to a life of joy before we are 10, ideally, but it could be after. I don't mean that after 10 is too late, but it's better to do it before 10 but before 15, before 20, before 25. Okay, so as long as not most of mankind is exposed to that high quality education, the substitute, a plutocratic life, would always be tempting. And those who are relentless enough to succeed, to get the power and the money to give themselves the consolation, would get them. And those who are not skillful or relentless enough to get those two stuff, power and money and wealth, well, they will go to drugs, to all kind of things to make them forget that they did not reach to creativity and to love.
So it's a stunting then of the self, that the self is not nurtured and expanded to grow to a point of creative expression, and to even to recognize the things in one's existence, one's surrounding, that rewards and nourishes that that sensibility of even, there's the outward expression or the outward action of creating, and then there's also the absorption that you can observe the creative, the beautiful, the sublime, and that is very much different than what you're talking about in the case of the plutocrats' pursuit, that that accumulation of wealth and power and distraction ultimately, and then for the failed plutocrats, they're still pursuing that distraction through substances and whatever form that they can get to fill the void.
Yeah.
So the issue then I have is that, or the question, not the issue. Okay, so you use the example of a better, or you used a different word, but higher form or whatever of education. And I guess the thing that comes up for me is that in everything that I see educational in my experience as a student, well, in a public school situation, not my own pursuits, of course, is that I think Susan actually commented on this connection of bringing the spiritual education to what I think, Kwan, you were talking about. Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that education system that we have experienced, and that if that spiritual awareness and expansion could become part of our, especially younger, youthful, I think that's a great idea. Sorry, just focusing here. To bring about the satisfaction of that creative expression, which then, of course, when more of us attain that higher plateau that most of us could barely even get a glimpse of, where we are living and expressing oneself as a true spirit and mind. Kwan, you used the word mind, and I'm not, again, pigeonholing you into that, so please don't take it that way, but that it is the unification of both the spirit, self, soul, mind, consciousness to that level of creativity, that perhaps that goal can be achieved of a better world.
Absolutely.
Please,
that's
can I
the
comment
root.
on this?
That's the solution, the root of the solution.
I think we have to let Susie comment on this.
She's gonna go.
When I heard Kwan express that the true definition of education is to bring forth from within and to remember, it was such an amazing moment of revelation for me. I am very much coming from, I think, a Christian perspective, but I would probably be at odds with most of the Christian church. We all are birthed from the heart of our Creator. Whatever your particular belief system, that is where we come from. And in this journey of this realm on earth, we need to come back to the understanding of where we came from, who we came from. And that is the journey of epistemological growth. For our mind, in everything that that word can mean, not just the natural mind, but the spiritual mind informing the natural mind. But everything in these systems has caused such compartmentalization and such fragmentation and so much materialism. We are so separated from the spiritual reality of who we are created to be.
Yeah, recognizing what was already there in the first place.
Yes. Quan, I love you. Matt, I love you. Sam, thank you so much for these lectures. Thank you, Sam.
It's Matt's mission and the mission of the rising tide to if plutocracy versus aristocracy, aristo meaning the best people, the most virtuous people. The point is education to develop the citizenry into those types of people, and then the second part of the word, the kratos, which is the rule
or Sam,
you
muted
power.
Yourself.
How do we get those best people into power? So first, how do we develop the citizenry and develop those people, and then how do we get them into power and get rid of the plutocracy?
Yeah, that's a hard question, that one, isn't it?
How do you
that's a really
create
tough
virtue
one.
and then reward virtue instead of rewarding vice and creating vice? I mean, that's the thing. Like we're in a system, as Quan called it, a kakistocracy, which is, I think, the most perfect description of this. It really, that's what it is. It's the rule by the worst, most unfit slobs, right? It's the and so we've got that where there's all of these perversions of Hamiltonian economics that provide subsidies to the most destructive forms of thinking, feeling, and action in every regard, wherever the system poisons itself. It's like the inside out version of what the national system of political economy should have been. Whereas the idea that we've all been touching on here is, if we're going to overcome it, there's no silver bullet. Every generation has to renew the discoveries of the previous generation and its commitment to pick up the torch and carry it forward, right? But you have to always make things better. If you start tolerating mediocrity or stasis, you immediately get into a state where things are going to get worse, because in the universe, everything is changing. And the question is it changing for the better or for the worse? And as soon as you try to hold on to like some stasis, you're going to get worse, because you've like lost the aspiration for self-perfectibility, for, leaving something more that was lacking because your life was lived a certain way. You're able to contribute something to the immortality of the species. That's gone. So yeah, how do you reward virtue instead of rewarding vice, and how do you encourage the awakening of as much of that as possible each generation? It's always the challenge.
A republic, if you can keep it.
You said it.
So we can't just outlaw.
Sorry, Susan, go on.
We can't just outlaw stupidity.
Well,
no, it's education.
I'm sorry if my microphone is full of heavy sounds at the moment. It's once more pouring like mad outside. Your comment, Matthew, reminds me of a cartoon meme that I think I have to share with everybody here, because I burst out laughing when I saw it, that's for sure. It was a cartoon of the burning bush on Mount Sinai and Moses walking away from the burning bush carrying 2 tablets. And the comment from the burning bush was, make sure you come back in 10 years, things will change, you need an update. Your comment on stasis is what I'm getting at there. There's an analogy, a metaphor for that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't take this as fixed and written in perpetuity for the rest of forever. The burning bush is saying, be sure to come back in a decade, things will change, you'll need an update.
Perhaps you can't outlaw stupidity, but maybe if you can define what an a-hole is and then outlaw an a-hole.
I don't think you can outlaw it, but I do agree with Quan that you can educate against it. The potential is there, is what I'm saying.
It's the only solution, but unfortunately the most difficult as well.
Yep. Yeah, always has been.
Always has been.
Yeah. It's a continuous endeavor because the plutocracy will try to infiltrate the right education, of course.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So
But
we
it
have
really
to
is.
become. Go ahead, Susie.
I was just going to say, but it really is true that life is stronger than death and love is stronger than fear, or I wouldn't even be here anymore.
And take heart, because truly evil contains within its own plans the seeds of its own destruction. Always.
Yes. Yes.
I was just going to say that if it's truly survival of the fittest, we have to become epistemologically fit so we can survive.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I like that.
Good job. Good job.
Well, guys, I think this is a good epistemological muscle builder that we go through these on these Wednesday nights. I'm sorry, Quan, were you gonna toss out another?
No,
I
no.
see a thought bubbling below your eyes.
No. It was an automatic movement. That's all.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, yeah, no, this is good mind soul food. So always appreciate these things. And next week we'll get on with reading number 4. Do you think that I guess it'll be probably 2 readings, Sam, before we probably 2 more readings before we finish this.
We'll see. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're doing well though.
Yeah, this is fun. And for anybody here who's not part of the Telegram group, the epistemological Telegram group with the sub channels, send me your contact info. We can put you on, and everyone can, whenever people find things that are of quality, they could share it or just contribute their thoughts to whatever discussion's happening. Otherwise, this is cool. So this Sunday, just so everyone knows, for those who are able to come, it'll be Dr. Michael Claridge from the Sapphire Project, who's going to grace us with a lecture on the different, a new concept of time, based upon certain concepts from the electric universe and new discoveries in the quantum and macrocosm realm. So I have no idea what he's going to say, but he's a brilliant guy. So I'm curious. That'll be 2 p.m. on Sunday. And the science program is going to go on for another 3 weeks after that. And then we're going to shift gears into some history. So everyone, thank you all, and see you next week.
I have to wait for that one to come up as a replay, but I look forward to it.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you, Sam.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Here we are.
Good night.